Well, good evening and welcome to the Guyana Business Journal election conversations. Tonight, uh, we're awaiting our speaker, uh, Mr. Nigel Hughes. And so, I'm just going to start in the interest of time because I know that that is a genuine issue. And so I want to welcome you. I'm Terrence Blackman, Chair and Associate Professor of Mathematics at Medgar Evers College in the City University of New York, and the founder of the Guyana Business Journal. And welcome to this pivotal edition of the Guyana Elections 2025 conversation series hosted by the Guyana Business Journal and Magazine. Tonight, we're continuing a dialogue that stretches beyond partisanship into the deeper questions of justice, of leadership, and democracy in this Guyana's defining hour. I'm really honored to welcome you, whether you're tuning in from Georgetown, from New York, from Switzerland, from Malaysia. The Guyana Business Journal has a very, very wide and varied global listenership. Atlanta, Georgia, uh, Miami, Miramax, Florida, uh, obviously New York, Toronto, London, just broadly in the Guyanese diaspora. Tonight's session is titled Leadership in the Oil Era. And as I've just noted, we're scheduled to be joined by Nigel Hughes, uh, Guyana's sort of eminent counsel and presidential candidate for the Alliance for Change. And he will be joining us shortly. We've just heard he's about 10 minutes late. And so in the meantime, what I'd like to do is to set the stage for this conversation and to give some context for why it really matters so deeply. Let's begin with the truth. Guyana is in the midst of its third founding moment. As we've discussed in earlier sessions, drawing on the work of David Hinds, our national story has been shaped by three defining eras. The first, emancipation, when formerly enslaved Africans, against all odds, left plantations, launched the village movement. One of the most inspiring acts of grassroots land ownership and civic organization in world history. The second sort of founding moment is independence, achieved in 1966, which offered us sovereignty, but also left us with unresolved questions about governance, unity, and identity. And now I think we're at the third era, the era of oil. And this is a moment of immense possibility, but it is also a moment of grave risk. It is a moment that will define the kind of society we become for generations to come. And this third founding moment, and I think this is the point, and I'm glad that, Attorney Hughes is running just a little late because it's given me an opportunity to sort of really kind of articulate what it is that we at the Guyana Business Journal were aiming at. See, this third founding moment, it's not just an economic one. It is a moral and civic challenge. We have to ask, will the oil wealth lift all Guyanese or only a few? Will it bring us together or drive us further apart? Will it build sustainable opportunity, or will it vanish in grand projects and forgotten villages? And in a sense, we're not alone in facing these questions. history is filled with examples of nations who found treasure underground but lost their soul above ground. This resource course is real, but crucially, it is not inevitable. That's the point I've been trying to drive for the last 4 or 5 years. The resource course is real. There are lots of examples of folk who have found treasure underground and have lost their soul above the ground. And most important, it is important that we understand that the trajectory is not inevitable. And the deciding factor here is not geography or geology, it's governance. And I think that that's why these conversations are so important. And in a sense, this is what this conversation is about. What kind of leadership does this moment demand? Guyanese have to look themselves in the eyes and say, let's for one moment think honestly, think real hard, think critically about what the future looks like, what kind of Guyana our children and our grandchildren will inherit, and what kind of leadership, most important, does this moment demand? Often, folks don't really fully appreciate leadership matters profoundly. It really does matter who runs the schools, who runs the bank, who runs the corner shop, who runs the supermarket. Leadership matters, and it matters profoundly. And we often talk about leadership in abstract terms, but in Guyana, it has always been deeply personal. Leadership here is about trust. It's about vision. It's about one's ability to navigate our country's complex political terrain, while at the same time refusing to give in to cynicism. Skepticism, yes, but cynicism is corrosive. Cynicism, no. The tribalism, no. And the fear, no. The point is that the next president of Guyana is not going to just manage oil contracts. They will shape the psychological contract between the state and the people. And in a sense, that's why we're trying to talk to the presidential candidates directly, not just about their policies, but also about their philosophy, not just about the next 5 years, but also about the next 50 years. So let me be clear also that this is not an elite conversation. It's a youth conversation. It is your future that is on the table, your voice, your creativity, your struggles, your aspirations. Recently I had this conversation with someone and asked to, channel some of my youth and, growing up in Guyana, and I remember, in spite of all of the challenges, extremely idyllic childhood, playing cricket on the street, playing basketball, going into the back dam, swimming in the Blake and the Lamaha Canal, going into the cane fields, and somehow I think that we want our young people to grow up with that sense of innocence. And as we saw recently with the case of Adriana Young, some of that innocence has been stripped away from our society. And so in that sense, this conversation is really a profoundly moral one as we think about leadership. So I don't want you only to focus on, barrels of oil and GDP growth, but we also have to ask, what does that mean for a 22-year-old in Linden? What does it mean for a 19-year-old in Tushin? What does it mean for a young woman in Berbice studying business, wondering, will she find a job in her own country? So we believe leadership in this moment must center the voices of the youth, not as a token gesture, but as a governing principle. And in a way that brings us to tonight's guest, Mr. Nigel Hughes, who many of you know. He's a man whose name has long resonated in Guyana's legal, political, and civic spaces. He's known for his courtroom work. He's known for his advocacy for justice, his role in shaping the early trajectory of the AFC. And now, in this, we believe, most consequential election, he is stepping forward with a presidential vision. What that vision is, how it speaks to the moment we're in, is what we're here to explore tonight. And so as we wait for a few more minutes for Mr. Hughes to join us, I want to invite you to reflect on a few questions. What does leadership mean to you, especially in a country where trust in the politics has been broken again and again? What would a truly inclusive Guyanese economy look like? And most importantly, what is your role in shaping this moment, not just as a voter, but as a citizen? And when Mr. Hughes arrives, we're going to ask him these questions, and we're going to get him to speak directly to these questions. But for now, I want to thank you again for being a part of this democratic moment. We're genuinely honored to have you with us, and we look forward to the conversation ahead. Perhaps while I wait, I can loop some of Nigel's previous remarks into. I know this question we're not going to get to, because I want this to be vision oriented, and I know that a number of the issues as they relate to, the coalition are central. And he's here, and so we're going to have him speak to those. So let me bring him forward. How are you doing, sir? I can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry, Dr. Lackman, my profuse apologies. What happened was there was an accident in the roundabout on the Heroes Highway, and that caused traffic to back up, and I couldn't get home in time. So please forgive me.
No.
For all your listening.
Thank you. We were able to, I think, better frame the conversation, and let me just say a few words to introduce you, because I often think people don't fully appreciate the importance of the lived story. So, let me once again say that we're honored to welcome someone who, as someone said, he's long been part of Guyana's civic imagination. Mr. Nigel Hughes is the presidential candidates for the Alliance for Change, and he is one of Guyana's most respected legal and political voices. Some would say he is one of Guyana's most eminent counsels, with over 3 decades of experience in constitutional and civil law. He is a partner of the firm Hughes, Fields, and Stobie. He has led landmark cases involving civil liberties, state accountability, indigenous rights. He holds a Bachelor of Law degree from the University of the West Indies, completed his legal training at Hugh Whitting, and he also studied political science at the University of Kiel in the United Kingdom. As former chair of the AFC, he helped to shape the party's early coalition building strategy, and is now leading efforts to offer Guyanese a renewed, forward-looking political alternative. He's a national figure who speaks with conviction on issues ranging from judicial reform to youth empowerment and the moral obligations of leadership in the oil era. So, Mr. Hughes, Thank you again for being with us tonight. And perhaps let me begin here.
Doc, can I just
Yeah, sure.
modify just one statement in my academic record? I actually didn't have the privilege of going to University of the West Indies. I went to University College London, where I read my first degree and my master's in law. And then I read law. I was admitted to the bar in the UK, and then came back to Guyana. So I didn't do political science at Keele, neither did I attend the UWI.
So you studied entirely in the UK.
In the UK, yeah.
Okay. So again, let me thank you for being, with us tonight. And you're entering this race at the time of, growing disillusionment, but also kind of immense potential. How do you see your role in this moment? What kind of leadership does Guyana need now? And, perhaps share with us how your vision differs from that of the current administration and other opposition figures.
Sure. First of all, let me say it's a real privilege and honor to have been invited to you. And I say that genuinely because I follow your interviews with various leading actors, political and otherwise, in Guyana. And thank you for having invited me. You say that Guyana is at this position, but it's been there before. We seem every probably 10, 15 years to get to this position. In terms of what I seek, or what the Alliance for Change, let me say, seeks to offer that perhaps this current administration definitely is not offering, is first of all, I believe that we, as a country, need to start planning in 15 and 20-year cycles. And that's the Alliance for Change's position. That's particularly important because we have to have long-term plans on which there is broad political consensus. We've identified 5 key areas which we would certainly endeavor to arrive at political consensus across the board. Those are, of course, the economy, health, education is for us the number one issue, education, foreign affairs, and poverty reduction. 15 to 20-year plans, because we are at the stage where we've been afforded the good fortune of having the resources to build a modern Guyana in terms of structures, economic structures, constitutional architecture that would cater for what the country needs for the next 10 to 15 years. And so for us, it's essential to have at least broad plans in those 5 areas which will survive electoral cycles. So if one party loses and another party gets in, particularly in education, which I hope is the least controversial, we would have agreed set goals which we are working towards, and therefore a change in the electoral cycle doesn't adversely impact the educational program that's there. And I think that's perhaps for us, of course, it's the most important. I think that is one of the key areas that we differ from the present party. We have put out infrastructural development plan for all 10 regions. It'll take me a long time to go through each, but each one of them is based on economic structures and programs that are long-term. So for example, the palm oil development in Region 1, we've also think it's important that there is at least one international port in Region 1, so that product, palm oil, which has been consistently increasing in price over the last 5 years, can be directly exported, so we don't have to look at moving it to Georgetown and then moving it from Georgetown elsewhere. Region 2, similarly, a charity, an international port, to be able to move the agricultural products, coconut water, and all the other products that come from the Pomeroon and that part of the country directly out. So you'll have a port there, it'll be a modern facility, that's long-term. Region 3, again, Parika should have another port for the same purpose. The Parika to Goshen Road with a roll-on, roll-off ferry between Goshen and Bartika, because critical to our plan is that the development of a road network that would allow us to move our resources to port. We've had a lot of noise about roads, but they all concentrated more or less on the coast and definitely in regions 4 and 5. And you're not really moving product around there or increasing productivity. What you're doing is making it a little bit more convenient. So I think we need to be able to connect this country by road. Region 4, which of course is the heart, we clearly have several issues. One of them is transportation. We're proposing mini rail, sorry, from Diamond to Georgetown, Mahika to Georgetown. We want to make Durban Park the hub, the transportation hub for Region 4. So if you're coming from as far away as Molson Creek on the border, or whether you're coming from Lethen, everything converges in Durban Park, a bit like your Grand Central, and then the feeder, minibuses and big buses. So it's not just mini rail, it's also big buses. But the most important thing about this, Doc, is that all of this has to be driven by data. So this is our plan. We know, for example, the international port, we will put it where all the experts say it should be, which is at Clonbrook on the coast. And just so your readers understand why Clonbrook is chosen, it's not a political choice. At Clonbrook, it's the shortest distance between the shore and the end of the international, the continental shelf. So the port there, you actually have the deepest water closest to the port. I think, as everybody knows from high school, our rivers have sandbanks at the mouth, and you have to keep dredging them. If we put that international port, and then we enhance the bilateral trade agreements that we have with Brazil, this will afford that all-weather road initially to bring goods from northern Brazil, principally Manaus, but of course it allows the movement of goods from northern Brazil. Manaus, to take an example, takes 5 days. If you put a container on a vessel, it takes 5 days for it to get from Manaus up the Amazon to the eastern sea coast of Brazil. That's just up the river. If you put the same container, the same 40-foot or 20-foot container on a truck, it will take 18 to 20 hours to get to Georgetown. So you don't need to see much more than that. There have been several feasibility studies done on this. I think the IDB has probably done 8 or 10. Brazil has done several. Of course, we're going to have bilateral trade relations, and Lethen will become a duty-free hub because, of course, the goods can be parked there and then they move directly from there to that international port. These are all long-term plans, which clearly you have to have, I think, broad political consensus on the development. And I know that this is perhaps one of your interesting topics for us. The development of the non-oil economy is absolutely critical. We have the benefit of oil revenues now, but unless we start to balance the budget based on the non-oil income and expenditure, we are going to be in serious problems. Now, current projections are that we're going to have decent oil revenues for 15 years. We have to make sure that we use some of that and invest that in building up and building a very robust non-oil sector. Agriculture is obviously the one that everybody speaks about. You've got a large market in the Caribbean that imports, 32 billion US dollars worth of food. We have to get that right. We have to get the packaging right. We have to do the research in that right. And that's part of the reason why we've put ports in regions 1 and regions 2, so that you can move that product straight out. In region 5, you probably know since the late 60s, there were phases 2 and 3 to the MMA to increase the rice production there. None of this is new. It's all there. It's all been studied. It just has to be updated. So that's what's going to be done. And I see you smiling because I'm sure you're thinking, amongst other things, a lot of the developmental work on Guyana was done decades ago. It was done during the Burnham era. It was done before that. The Germans had a plan. The British had a plan. And it's because the essential elements of Guyana don't change. Region 6, again, the Kanji Basin and rice, that is a big area for development. And of course, the ports. One of the challenges, and now we see the less than optimal thinking by putting a floating bridge at the mouth of the Berbice River. Of course, it stops the development of ports on either side of the Berbice Bridge heading south, because, of course, that bridge is only open twice per day. And of course, you don't have 24-hour traffic. That's one of the reasons we've had the Demerara Harbor Bridge built. So Berbice, again, going down, Ibini, mega farms, so soya when you go down to Takama and the savannas in that area. And we need to be able to move that product to market. There's currently, I think, a 3,000-acre farm there that is planting soya, experimental. And a lot of that is going into making feed. But I also noticed that they are developing a bit of a port there because it's deep. and the river is navigable. But all of this opens up those areas. Region 7, of course, Bartica, the center of business, that takes place in up the Cuyuni, up the Mazaruni. We link that by road, the bridge, the roll-on, roll-off ferry. I know I'm going on a bit. Region 8.
No. I think it's good.
Region 8,
Yeah.
subject to the engagement and consent of the indigenous peoples who are located in both Upper Maz and in Region 8. Hydropower is one of those areas. Region 9, Letham, of course, you've got that free port for transportation of goods and, of course, tourism. And Region 10. Region 10 outside of Georgetown, I think Region 10 actually is the most strategically located city in the country. To get to Region 7, 8, 9, you have to pass through Region 10. It's a logistic center that needs to have as much support to avoid several things. So right now we have a lot of problems with trucks going down the road, carrying supplies to the interior. There's no reason for them to go past Region 10. We should have a large fuel tank farm. Gaia can set that up. Plus, we can establish the businesses which can support all the gold and other mining industries that take place in 7 and 8 in Region 10. So there's no need to add traffic to the East Bank Road to get there. Of course, Region 10, you can get there by boat. The Chinese are exporting bauxite at a phenomenal rate. Every time I go to London, up to 2 weekends ago, there are 3-4 boats docking there per day, taking bauxite out. So Region 10, to me, makes logistical sense to become a business hub in all senses. It also had, prior to the expansion of Timeri, the longest runway in the country, because when the Demerara Bauxite Company was there, the executives used to fly all the way there. So that's an additional area. So, international courier companies, whether it's your FedExes, whether it's the others that want to feed South America, can actually look at that location. We can look at entering into business relations with international courier companies and other companies that want to be able to get goods logistically into South America. That would be a logical place to put it. They don't have to land at Timeri. It can become a cargo hub. You've got goods coming out of the north, and that can become a logistical center for the distribution of air cargo, certainly in northern South America. And we've got to move on this quickly. That's in terms of infrastructure.
Well, just as you're moving on it quickly, what does Nigel Hughes' presidency look like on day one?
You mean well, okay. So a Nigel Hughes presidency will start off by assuming that all the talent that is needed to develop this country does not reside in the Alliance for Change. And that's not just a function of our size. If I led any of the other parties, I'd be at the same position. So we need to tap the best talent this country has for the specific areas. And I'm going to pick a very, very easy one to start with. Foreign affairs, very difficult area. We have border problems with Brazil. With Venezuela. Clearly, we need a long-term strategy to deal with Venezuela on both the diplomatic and economic front. But apart from that, some of the obvious people that I would seek to engage immediately would be, for example, Carl Greenidge. Amazing talent, he's beyond talent, he's the amazing experience. He's been there for a long time. He is our representative at the ICJ, and he's got decades of experience in foreign affairs, not just in the border, but just dealing with the management of Guyana's foreign policy. So somebody like Carl Greenidge would be certainly one of the first persons I'd want to speak to in terms of how we would address the border. You have real talent. You've got Dr. Riyad Insanali, who was former ambassador for Guyana to the United States. You've got people, he's in the People's National Congress. He advises David Hills. We've got a lot of, there are a lot of people that would be go-to people immediately. So, and the economy, which is fundamental. We would need to tap out of the universities international, people like yourself. You've got the gentleman at Yale. You've got a gentleman up at Cambridge that we have been consulting with, who's done presentations across the board. not just in the personage of the Minister of Finance, but certainly you need a very strong economic panel to advise the minister. This is not something that I want to leave solely in the hands of the president. So that would be our approach, and that would cut across most areas, because we need to get the best.
Can I pause you there? You
Sure.
raise it in your approach. So there are two things that immediately emerge from that approach. One, you seem to already be saying, even though you're the president from the Alliance for Change, you've essentially cast a broad net. You have, in a way, not taken a partisan view about how you're going to staff your team. And so I wanted to ask, given how you would you pursue some constitutional reform?
Absolutely.
What you prioritize?
So, Doc, let me say this.
Yeah.
The reason I entered politics way back when, to 2011, the sole reason I entered politics was constitutional reform. I really thought that it was so fundamental to Guyana that before we started talking about anything else in terms of developmental plans, we needed constitutional reform. You may recall when the coalition got into power, I was asked to coordinate a group of experts that included Haslin Paris, Professor Lutchman, really high talent, the high talented committee, Stephen Fraser, which I was asked to coordinate. And we put together a framework for what would have been a constitutional reform commission that would have advised, which would have been established to deal with constitutional reform. Our approach wasn't, let's get people who are from the trade union, lawyers, etc. It was going to be a blend of the best international constitutional experts to advise how this process of constitutional reform and the process of transforming Guyana from its present state into a modern state with modern rights that are as accessible to the least equipped of our students as it is to the most advanced. I say that because in one of my visits to South Africa, which has an extremely modern constitution, I did, in one of my engagements with a couple of legal experts, they did say, it's great that you have it in paper, but in terms of it translating into real accessibility to the average South African who's toiling away, maybe they might have done a couple of things different. So Guyana's first problem with the existing constitution is, one, you can't have a multi-ethnic society and have a winner-take-all system in which the winner doesn't even have to get 50% of the vote. He can get 30% of the vote, provided everybody else gets less than him, and he or she automatically gets all the executive power. That is a recipe for disaster. Our neighbors to the east in Suriname have a system which I quite like, which is that the president can only become president if he or she is elected by 60% of the parliamentarians. And that immediately puts a stake in sort of partisan, perhaps ethnically biased politics, because there's no way you're going to get 60% of the parliamentarians to vote for you unless you have policies that appeal to everybody, or that you enter into negotiations with political parties that create policies that would benefit not just the group that might have elected you, but it would be sufficiently attractive to allow you to get 60% of the vote. One of the second thing that we would want to propose a change to, is that you don't have to have pre-election coalitions. Let the people speak, and then let the parties afterwards decide how they want to amalgamate and get a majority so that they can identify a person who will get 60% of the votes of the parliamentarians. Those are two key areas, very, very fundamental to us, because we don't believe the winner-take-all system works at all. And it has to go, because it's such a drag. I mean, if you look at the experience of the last 5 years, I don't think, other than foreign affairs, the issue with Venezuela, has the president consulted with Mr. Norton on any aspect of development. Now, how can you have an election in which there's a one-seat majority and not think it necessary as part of the political process to engage the other 49% of the population? It means it's almost as if you have an entitlement to shut them out. And you know what the consequences of that are, and we're living through it. So I think constitutional reform for me personally would be of the highest priority. One of the classic examples, this situation where the president and the leader of the opposition must agree before you can appoint a substantive chancellor and chief justice, which has been going on for more than 20 years. Let's take the politics out of it. If the leader of the opposition and the president can't agree after a specified time, we've said 6 months, kick it up to the Caribbean Judicial Service Commission. They appoint the judges for the CCJ. They vet the best brains in the Caribbean for the CCJ. They appoint judges who are from territories that are not even signatories to the CCJ. And if we trust them to identify the judges for our apex court, why can't both the leader of the opposition and the president send up their candidates with their views and have the Caribbean Judicial Service Commission make the recommendation, and then let's move on. This unacceptable state of affairs.
On that, how would a Hughes administration, you've just articulated one of the ways in which you might, more effectively pick the chancellor of the judiciary. What other ideas would you have in mind for strengthening the judiciary and say, revitalizing some of the institutions like SARA, so that, there's a credible corruption fight, so that there are independent institutions that can take on that role, that increasingly important role in the current context?
You've touched, and I think one of the critical aspects of what a modern Guyana would look like, and that is institutional strengthening. We clearly are very weak institutionally. We don't have a petroleum commission. We're 5 years into commercial production of oil. We don't have a petroleum commission. That's almost a no-brainer. To come to the Judicial Service Commission, I think we need to be able to attract judges beyond our borders to come and sit on our bench. And we've had some sterling examples in the Commonwealth Caribbean. Belize had a Chief Justice, Conte, who I believe came either from Sierra Leone or Ghana. Excellency Chief Justice, sat there for decades and had very, very progressive decisions. We have Guyanese jurists sitting in Belize as Chief Justice. We've had previous Chief Justice of Belize being a Guyanese jurist. So we've had Guyanese jurists sitting in eminent positions throughout the Caribbean. And as part of the cross-fertilization, I wouldn't limit it to the Caribbean at all. I would expand it to the Commonwealth on a whole, because we need we're at the stage where we need the finest minds in all our institutions, but you've chosen judiciary to be able to sit on the bench with integrity and advance the jurisprudence of Guyana, advance the thinking, bring progressive thought to Guyana, and it's not limited. I hate to use you as an example, but I will say this. If we have been hemorrhaging our tertiary level graduates at the rate of somewhere between 70 and 85%, it is clear that most of the brain power of the country is not staying here. So for us to limit the pool, and this is not an attack on anybody, for us to limit the pool of the possible range of candidates to people who are in Guyana or willing to serve in Guyana, I think is not to our benefit. And we have to look at what will make people comfortable living in Guyana. What would make a jurist one of the best? If we took a jurist out of academia, whether he was sitting in South Africa or he was sitting in India or wherever, what would it take to have that person come and serve on our bench? What would it take to have a judge from Trinidad come and serve on the bench? And it's a lot. It's the whole package. It's just not the remuneration. It's what's going on in the society, the quality and standard of living, all the amenities that may be there, the level of academic research, and the fact that person feels that they can actually make a contribution, not just to the development of jurisprudence in Guyana, but to the development of jurisprudence internationally. And I brings me to another important constitutional point that I should have mentioned earlier, the savings clause. One of the first things that I would ask an attorney general, if I were fortunate enough to be president, would be to have the savings clause removed from the Constitution. Just so your listeners understand, what the savings clause does is protect laws that existed prior to the Constitution, which may be in breach of the fundamental rights in the Constitution just by virtue that they existed before. So, for example, we went to court maybe about 4 or 5 years ago in the famous cross-dressing case, McEwen, and the CCJ struck it down because, to be locking up people because they choose different clothing was a breach of their rights. And we don't want people's fundamental rights cluttered by the savings clause. We've seen this in death penalty and other matters, and that's one of the first obstacles that I would certainly seek to have removed. But I hope that gives you a sense. For me,
I think I certainly I want to go to the other side of what you've done. I think you're describing an architecture of saying, look, in order for us to be competitive, a Hughes-led government will aim to be competitive at all levels. And so I want to take this to the other level. In a country where, the data says, 48% of the people are poor, i.e. living on $5.50 a day. Let's say something about economic justice within that context. How do you ensure that the oil wealth is not just in Georgetown, but it's also in the hinterland, it's also in the vulnerable? Do you see sort of targeted policies being put forward by the AFC to support youth as a class, women, support rural folks in that way? And maybe I'd add, do you support something like a universal basic income or some variation of that for Guyanese within its context?
Sure, Doc. I'm so happy that you've asked that. I'm sorry that I haven't sent you our manifesto, or we call it our action plan. We introduced last week, and we invited all political parties to endorse this particular policy. Right now, most Guyanese cannot afford to purchase land in Guyana in the neighborhoods in which they live, whether they rent or what have you. Georgetown, the prices of land and along the riverbank on the east bank, an acre of land is already $1 million an acre.
What?
Because it's sitting. So what is happening in Georgetown is you've seen a lot of fancy buildings going up, but what is happening there is literally the gentrification of Georgetown. And that's moving further south. So as you go south of Brickdown, where you have a lot of traditional family homes, et cetera, family properties, a lot of those are going to get bought out. And they're going to be owned either by very wealthy overseas companies or very wealthy Guyanese. So you're going to be pushing the present residents of Guyana out of the center. And this gets replicated everywhere. It means that a lot of Guyanese will never be in a position to own a piece of their country of their birth. And one of the policies that we proposed was that upon attaining the age of 18, every citizen should be given a house lot. They would get a start. It gives them a stake in the country. It gives them something which ties them to the land. If they don't manage that properly and they sell it, then so be it. That we're not here to manage how they manage that. But I think every citizen should be given such a break, because you can't, in a time of plenty and in a time of economic progress, have large sections of the community completely cut out of any prospect of development. Leveling up is an essential part of our program. And leveling up, I don't mean just giving a direct transfer, but we do have a process for that. We're saying, look, we will appoint a panel of economists, and we should have a statutory framework that says every year we give 15% of the income from oil and gas by way of direct transfer to the citizens, so that irrespective of whether you're the top, middle, or the bottom, you get a part in the stake. And the economists, of course, will advise. If for some reason it puts the economic development in a precarious position to do that, and the commission advises that there's a suspension or a variation downward of that figure, they make the recommendation, it gets done. That panel of economists they won't be politically appointed. These would be the best that we can find, a blend of those perhaps at the University of Guyana and those that are in academia internationally. So that way, that transformation takes place. But that's just the fiscal aspect of it. For us, this is why education is particularly important. The only way any citizen in Guyana is going to have a stake in the modern oil economy is if they're skilled and semi-skilled. Otherwise, their business and employment prospects are going to be pretty slim to zero. They're going to just become second-class citizens. So we have to make sure that we train most of our citizens so they are at a stage where they are employable in the modern economy, or they have the skill to start their own business. So one of the things we're going to do, and this is not new, this is just a voluntary form of national service. We're losing children at 48% are dropping out of secondary school. That was the last figure that existed. So by setting up this National Skills Academy, these persons are going to be given a second chance, as well as persons who want to get specifically trained. They will be trained for whatever the period recommended by the educators, 10 to 12 months, in areas that are relevant to the modern economy. So whether it's harnessing, offshore welding, everything that is necessary, including construction, because of course, as you know,
just to push some folks have talked about something like the technical institute, in the regions. I know that we have a significant number. I mean, are there plans to?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry to cut you. I was just dealing with what we're going to be doing new. All the existing educational institutions, everything from the technical institutes all the way up to the University of Guyana, will have to have increased funding, particularly for research. Engineering at the University of Guyana, that faculty will have to have serious funding to assist research. Literally, if you think where we were back in the 60s with the engineers who were in the Ministry of Works, coming up with new material, we don't have to be using the same material that we import, reduce our import costs. The technical institutes have to be modernized. We have to spend a lot of money training the trainers as well. The biggest aspect of that is having our people trained, as well as hiring people from both the diaspora and internationally to come in and train. That's a given. But I just wanted to finish off on the National Skills Academy. So you get trained for 10 months. We know that you have a family to feed for 10 months, so you're going to get paid while you're being trained. You get a certificate once you matriculate at the end of the period. And then the state will do two things. It will either place you in the oil and gas industry or in the construction industry because you'll be certified. Or if you decide to go into business, we will give you the tools along with a financial advisor who will help you everything from the basic business plan to hold your hand for the first year so that you know when your business is going into danger without waiting until you are in very difficult waters and the financial institutions decide they're going to take your business away. In terms of women, I think 2 years ago, less than that, a year ago when I got in, one of the first things I had proposed was that we develop a bank for women. While we're developing that institution, we have to develop policies that are targeted for women. I just give you a couple of examples, and this is particularly for low to medium scale enterprises. Every day we see the ladies coming down from the East Coast from various places with baskets of fruits on their head, which they sell. The products that they don't sell at the end of the day, a lot of them have to get dumped. And so that's capital going down, and then they have to go and either borrow and start again. We're proposing all municipal markets should have cold storage made available very cheaply, so that those ladies can actually leave their products at next to nothing, come back the next day. It's extended the shelf life of their products by, I don't know, a week or whatever the data is on it. And in those cases, we will have financial experts who will not just walk them through the business that they have, but help them grow it. So I chose the vendors who are selling fresh fruit, but that goes all across the professional spectrum. Women in the oil and gas industry, whether they're doing logistics, whether they're doing immigration, whatever they are doing, we will hold their hands because we want to be able to build out that. I hate to use the word class. We want to be able to build out that broad spectrum of female entrepreneurship, primarily because a lot of the families in Guyana are single parent families. Those are just some of the areas.
No, so actually, you raised a kind of important issue, and I want to kind of approach this in a somewhat delicate manner. But we're talking about the petroleum wealth, and so this question always emerges about our relationship with ExxonMobil.
Sure,
I know that you have been. You've been criticized.
I welcome it because it's all good and they're legitimate
in this regard. So I wanted to give you a chance to speak to that insofar as you want to speak to that. But then more along the lines of, the money from ExxonMobil goes into Guyana's sovereign wealth fund. I mean, should our sovereign wealth fund, I know the argument has been that, the Guyana and Norway are different places on their trajectory, but, the Norwegian wealth fund now has enough money for the Norwegians to live on outside of their oil. And so, I think, is there a thought that, we should align that a little more closely with Norway? Should we have any changes, like requiring, say, a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly, so that you just can't present the plan and take 90% of the money that's sitting there? And maybe just a more personal one, like if you were when you become the president, would you just visit Norway?
Oh,
I think the conversation. I mean, I've had this with some. I mean, it's almost sometimes as if our folks, we're perfectly willing to take the Norwegian money for our
low carbon development,
low carbon development strategy, but we're unwilling to learn from the Norwegians who have this money to give us money for the low carbon strategy. So I'm just opening up. I'm not taking a judgment.
No, I have very strong views in that. There is no way any responsible government would have legislation that allows you to take 97% of the income from the sovereign wealth fund and spend it in any year. That is an absolute recipe for disaster. And I'm sorry that I'm this strong on it, but I think that is begging for trouble. Two, a significant component of the fund has to be saved and invested for future generations. You cannot possibly have a fund like that and not dedicate, I would say, somewhere between 30 to 35% for investment, secure, safe investment. It can't be so secure that it's growing below what the average investment rate is, but that's for the experts to decide. That's not for the president to decide. The president will take advice from the experts on that, but that should be enshrined in our constitution. We had something close to that. The fund had a board of 22, I think, when the previous administration was there. They've now changed it to say you can take up to 97%. You appoint your friends to that board. That to me is unforgivable. So you have to have it protected too. The investment of this fund has to be in the hands of experts. With the greatest respect to our most brilliant businessmen in Guyana, nobody manages or has managed the size of funds that are in the National Resource Fund. I mean, I'm sorry, if I'm managing $100,000 a year and you give me $10 billion a year with the best will in the world, the areas of possible investment with 100 million US dollars as compared to 100,000 Guyana dollars would be beyond my experience. It doesn't mean that I can't imagine what you can do, but there's so many financial products and nuanced products which are relatively safe, which hedge against future potential difficulties, that I keep saying the next 5 to 10 years of Guyana, we need to have the best experts advise us on this. And so for me, that's how I would manage it. Make sure that we've got enough money saved for the future generation. Right now, any child born in Guyana is born with a debt of $2 million. We're just borrowing like that. We have to have.
You want to reflect on that. I mean, I've been thinking about our debt strategy. I mean, we've borrowed about $2 billion, the gas to shore project, the various loans for roads, for bridges, etc. And, the strategy has been, at least if one were to think positively about the strategy is, okay, look, we know where we're going. We know where the money is coming from. So, let's build to meet the future demand. But
Is that what we're doing, Doc? I mean,
well, I'm giving a cohesive logic to it. So
right.
I'm assuming that there was some thought, and the person said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We know where we're going. We know, what we need when we get there. And so let's front load, let's borrow and build the thing. But as you just noted, if you borrow and build a thing, then it has to be built. It has to be built so that it is there when you get there, so that it's not degraded when you get there. So, what's your thought on, what would be an AFC sort of position? Are you've really focused on like capacity building as kind of the push that you guys are on. And I certainly think that that's really critical, because in order to be competitive, you need that sort of capacity building that you've just described. But you're sitting there with $2 billion, and you have to make a decision. Okay, you save 30%. What do you do with the rest of it?
Okay, so one of our core features again is the establishment of a national state planning commission. You can't possibly have a country like Guyana moving from essentially an agrarian economy, small population, less than 1 million people, huge resources in oil, absolutely mammoth inflows of revenue, and not have a state planning commission, which is gathering all the data. It's projecting at the same time where we're going to be, which means it's going to have signposts for where we're going into danger, which is key.
I just want you to know that this question is the question that people really are driving. So that the poverty rate of at least 50%.
Right.
Would a Nigel Hughes president go to immediate relief, and how that gets worked out? And I think that's the, somehow I think that's the question in this election, without being.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So the number one item on everybody's mind, the number one agenda from all the polls, is cost of living. Cost of living is the number one agenda. I think it was Demerara Waves or somebody that said that cost of living has gone up 70+% in the last 4 years. So the measures that have to be taken immediately have to reduce the cost of living. I don't subscribe to the view that merely increasing salaries addresses that, because all that happens when you increase salaries is that the people in the marketplace increase their prices without any economic reason for it. So let me perhaps start by breaking it down. One of the areas that we intend to attack to bring the cost of living down is, food prices. And let me start with food grown in Guyana. The food availability and food accessibility are two different things. The cost to produce food at the farm yard and the cost at which it is sold in the market, the disparity.
Let me just pause you for 1 sec. So I know you promised me until 8. It's exactly 8, but you were 10 minutes late. So I'm asking you for 10 minutes more.
Oh, no problem at all. No, I'd happily spend longer if you wanted. So let's say the cost of a tomato grown in in every agricultural area, let's say Mahica, let's say it's $20. The cost of that tomato in the Mahica market or in the Georgetown market gets to $100 or 100 plus. So it's the cost between where it's grown and what is sold that is really driving that price up. We've got to bring that. We've got to attack that and bring down that cost. So we've got to subsidize that to effectively bring that cost down. Now, a lot of people will say, well, you subsidize the cost of transportation of agricultural products to market. All that will happen is that the people will still keep the prices high. So the government has to get into the business of food sovereignty. And what it does in those cases is the government has to start acquiring fruits and vegetables, which it releases in the market when the prices go beyond what is a reasonable profit, so that the more vulnerable people in the country can get it. At the same time, those that are more vulnerable who qualify will have some sort of a voucher system that will enable them to be able to get the essential commodities at an acceptable rate. Now, you may call it government intervention in the market, but this is the issue. You cannot have your citizens being in a position of perpetual disability and poverty if you do not attempt to address what is causing that high cost of living. And if we've identified that it is the cost of moving goods from the farm to the market, we subsidize that. And where there is unorthodox intervention for the purposes of exploiting the consumer, the government will, through various methods, intervene by making those products available. It has to protect its citizenry. I'm not talking about price control here. I'm just saying that if you know that with a 40% profit, a pumpkin should cost $200 and it's at $400 and the government has pumpkins in its various warehouses, it will release it. I want to take the example of what happens in the hinterland. A gallon of gas on the coast is somewhere around $800 or $900. I just came back from the Upper Mazaruni. A gallon of gas in the Upper Mazaruni is $2,400.
Wow.
So the people who are least economically capable of paying for a gallon of gas are paying the highest rate. So what have we discovered? All the government will do is the government will pay for the transportation of the gas from the coast to those hinterland communities, so that they can get it at the same $800. So instead of spending $2,400, they're getting it at the same price as the cost, and the government will pay for the cost of moving it. So that takes out the entire middleman. It makes it affects the entire cost of living in the interior, because everything is based on gas, electricity, prices in the market, transportation. To get from Philippi to Chinapa, we had to spend $150,000 simply because it used, I can't remember, 80 to 100 gallons of gas. That changes the dynamic completely for the hinterland area, because now you have people buying gas at the same price as the coast. That changes the economics for many things. Production of a lot of the produce that we used to get coming out of the Northwest, that came out of places like Mabaruma, the Piers, etc., that used to flood the Guyana Georgetown market. Yeah. Now it's the exact opposite. People are sending goods from Georgetown up there. All of that's going to change, and it has to come with an economic plan, hence the State Planning Secretariat. So that's just two examples. In terms of, and I think this is perhaps going to have the greatest impact, we have said, look, every child must get to school, stay in school, and not be hungry so that they can learn. The first to propose one. This actually existed before during Mr. Granger's administration. The state will provide transportation for all children to get to school, whether it's by road, whether it's by boat, however, ATV, the state will pay for them. 2, the state will pay for their meals. Each school will have a cafeteria in it, and they will have high value, high protein, high content meals provided in the cafeteria. So you're not going to give them pastries and jam and pastries and cheese and call it meals. They'll get 2 meals. So at least those who are the most economically vulnerable are guaranteed that their children are going to get to school. They're going to be fed in school. Now, a lot of people in Guyana don't send their children to school because they can't afford the school uniforms, or they can't afford shoes, and they're embarrassed to send their children to school. The state will provide uniforms for all the children. So people don't have to go through, this social embarrassment. They've got they're wearing a shirt that is torn or something, and because they can't afford to do it. So we will pay for the uniforms. And the fourth thing we will do is, look, we will give every parent for every child $75,000 per term. That's money that they're going to have in addition to what the state is providing to them, the transportation to school, the meals, the uniform. That is per child, because we want to make sure every child, or I should say no child, suffers any social disadvantage. No child is hungry in school because they got to take sugar water and they can't learn. No child is subject to ridicule because the way in which they are decked out. And we will guarantee at least our students get there and are in a position to learn. That deals with the extreme child food poverty. The other thing we will do is this. We will create an intranet for all schools in the country, in which every school student and every student will have access to all the material they need for whatever grade they're in. So whether you are in Mybe Curie, whether you're in Shelton, whether you're in Buxton, your school will have the internet. It will be free, and you will be able to access all your educational material as your students. And the final thing is this, and this is particularly important in the hinterland area and the coast: community grounds and community centers. The NDCs cannot maintain those grounds. The state has to make sure that they are maintained at the best possible standard. We will make sure that every community ground has a community center, which has high-speed internet. So children, after they leave school, will have a place they can go do their homework. They will be supervised. Plus, they will have a ground, and every community ground will have at least one professional coach who will be there to supervise the children at different ages. Sports is absolutely critical. I know I'm running out of my 10 minutes, but I can go on to that at some other time.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll have at least one more conversation before. But I think as I listen to you, I introduce you as someone who, has been in the civic imagination of Guyanese, and I think your speaking here reminds us of why you hold such importance in the imagination of many Guyanese in terms of your approach to leadership. As we close, the one thing that we have.
Can I just be allowed this one indulgence? You remember what it was like going to school in the late 60s, early 70s, where there were bright students who, just because of their circumstances, were denied. There's so many examples that it brings.
I often think about many of them.
I didn't see that, but I'm telling you, how are you going to school with sugar water and you're going to make it through 4 sessions a day or whatever it is? And that's why it's important that we concentrate our effort on those young people.
Yeah, I think we often, many of us, reminisce of colleagues who had very special talents and who, for any number of reasons, particularly economic reasons, were unable to actualize those potentials, and it's a source of great pain for many of us. We've gone on, and the one thing we haven't touched on, and as we come to a close, I can't not let you. I mean, how do you analyze, think about, the sort of racial dimension of Guyana's politics, and in a sense, how do you view your candidacy in terms of helping us to realign our politics around shared values like the ones that you just described, rather than sort of our sort of blind allegiance to ethnic loyalties. And I think, from the AFC's position, it's in a sense, this was the raison d'etre of the AFC. How do you see this renewal of the AFC within this context at this moment?
Constitutional reform I touched on already, and why I think that is fundamental. The other absolutely important aspect of our development that we don't pay attention to is data, disaggregated data. Absolutely important. And the reason that it's important is not because I want to say to you, because I'm African, I am less economically advantaged. I want you to look at the figures and see why any particular cohort is at a different position from any other cohort. And let us agree that we will work forward to redressing that imbalance. Let us just look at the disaggregated data. Let's not look at the disaggregated data through any particular prism, whether it's ethnicity or what, but let us just agree. Let us have a right to this information. Let this information be shared with the entire country so everybody knows. And we are a mature.
I went and sort of did the digging up, and it seems that the last time there was disaggregated data within the context of Guyana around economic issues, etc., was 2006. Is there any particular reason that that sort of survey of the country has been paused or not been done? Is there a particular logic that underlies why we're not doing that?
I think the administrations between 2006 and now have a phobia about data. Let me just pick the obvious thing, the census. Why are we not entitled to have the census information 2 years after it's due? And we don't have a right and access to information. All the information upon which we make decisions should be accessible to every citizen. And that includes disaggregated data. We can only address a problem in education if we know what it is. Why is the matriculation rate in Region 9 at 5%? It's Region 9 obviously is an indigenous region, but if it's at 5%, what are the indicators for why it is so low? What it is it training of teachers? Is it curricula? Is it access to the internet? Whatever it is, let's take that data, get past what is obvious, it's an embarrassment, and start to identify the factors that need addressing and address them. For me, if you had any region that was matriculating at the rate of 5%, that's an immediate national disaster. And therefore, you declare it as a disaster and assign the funds to it with a long-term plan and a date by which you want to reverse that, the matriculation rate of 70%. So that you say, okay, Region 9 is at 5% matriculation rate. We say 2030. Our goal is to get it to 50%. What are the factors? What does the data say we need to move it there? And not get into defensive positions. Oh, we poured X billion into education. Obviously, what you poured into it has not worked, but we need a plan. And that's why education is one of the areas we're saying, let's have a 15 to 20-year plan. We agree broadly across the political divide, so that we don't have any part of our country that is matriculating at the rate of 5%. Education, again, why are we spending resources on people doing 24 subjects when we should go deeper with a narrower focus? You can do your 24 if you want, but the state is more concerned with specifically narrower areas that are going to lead to development. Teachers have to get certified. They have to get better training. So that would be my response to that question.
We're on the end, and we haven't said the one thing I haven't raised is I tried to raise it, but you kind of elided it. Yeah. So let me raise it in a different context.
No, you can raise it. No, please. You can be as blunt as you want. I have no difficulty answering questions the next time.
Let me raise it in this context. So, we're involved, Guyana is involved in some strategic partnerships with ExxonMobil, with China, in the geopolitical sense, with CARICOM, with the United States, where you touched on earlier, or border controversy with Venezuela. How would your how would your approach to global energy diplomacy differ from the current administration and perhaps differs from the other people with whom you're competing for the presidency?
Okay. Perhaps let me deal with energy on the border, because that's the greatest crisis that we face right now, the western border. Our friends in Miraflores and Caracas have said that if and when the ICJ rules in favor of Guyana, that they will ignore any ruling from that court. That's a real problem. We also know that if there is a regime change in Venezuela, or if the present administration in Venezuela increases its influence in Washington, Guyana has a real dilemma. Venezuela's reserves of gas and oil, particularly oil, are probably 100 times greater than Guyana. And we all know Mr. Kissinger articulated so well that American foreign policy is more interested, America has no permanent friends, but it has permanent interests. And clearly, any entity that has 100 times more oil reserves than us, the economic reality is obvious. Caracas, if there's a regime change or there's a change in relationship, the American relationship with Guyana, I think, will be impacted. So it means that Guyana has to have strategies to deal with all possible scenarios. Right now, we are enjoying excellent relations with the United States of America. Their premier companies are the premier operators in our oil and gas industry, but we are essentially a single product economy. What are the strategies that this country has to adopt, not only diplomatically, but by way of bilateral relations that would protect the integrity of our western border, irrespective of what different developments may take place in the future? We need our best and brightest for that. And for that, we need to put together a commission. Most of that commission may come from the diaspora. And I've identified Carl Greenwich, David Hills, Riyad Insinali, but this is just a minuscule amount, dedicated to permanently addressing the protection of the border. It's not something you could deal with whenever a crisis
basis when it pops up. Yeah.
And it certainly is not one which could depend on one single friend or series of friends, because when you model out the risks, they are several and varied. And therefore, everything from diplomacy, military arrangements, economic would be particularly important. We have available offshore blocks. We know that Brazil is the largest economic entity in South America. We know that Petrobras is a huge company. And it may well be strategically important to enter into an economic relationship with Brazil and Petrobras, in which they have one of the blocks offshore. It gives them a stake in Guyana being stable. It gives them a stake in seeing Guyana develop. If we establish that link that provides them with a port, there's an additional economic incentive for Guyana to remain stable and not have its integrity impeached. The Brazilians, we know, have a commitment to that all existing borders in South America ought to be maintained. And so it's that sort of research and the coming together of our best and brightest that will give us a strategy for 15 years, 20 years, various modeling out various scenarios, so that we are less likely to be taken by surprise, and we are better equipped depending on what comes out of Caracas. And that's important.
No, I think that's, I think the idea of an ongoing Guyana Venezuela study group, that kind of what I thought, but I think you've articulated an even larger vision of that, which is a kind of defense intelligence group, but with a much larger with a sovereignty preservation, a sovereignty preservation think tank that sort of sits as part of the access to the ideas that the president would have access to. We've come to the end, and I really want to thank you for your thoughtful and really comprehensive engagement with these critical issues facing Guyana. Certainly your willingness to address the questions of leadership, constitutional reform, economic justice, the future of our youth, dealing with vulnerable communities. I think it has provided the audience with much to reflect on. And I think you've also reminded us of the importance of inclusive and visionary leadership, right? And certainly the need for data-driven, long-term planning to ensure that Guyanese benefit from the nation's resources and the opportunities. And I really hope that tonight's dialogue will inspire continued sort of civic engagement and thoughtful debate as we move through these next few weeks. And I want to thank the folks who've joined us from across Guyana and the diaspora, and look forward to further conversations on this issue. I think we're scheduled to speak in our next installment with the Amanza Walls here, and I will give you the final word.
First of all, thank you again. I consider it a privilege to have been invited. I just want to leave. You remember the National Service song? I never went to National Service. I was considered quote unquote privileged. I didn't get there, but the song is one of the few songs I can still play on the piano, and it's called "I Want to Build This Land That Belongs to Me." Yeah. And as you reflect on it, as well as the Guyanese patriotic songs, it's that's what for me, that's what my generation was about. We want to build this land. We have an opportunity now that we've never had before. We've always had the intellectual capacity, the progressive thoughts, but we've never had the ability to put it into action. And I really hope and pray that we find a way.
Well, I wish you luck in the voting, and again, I want to thank you for the time and
thank you,
the vision, and
thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Yeah.
Thanks, and good night to your audience.
Thank you.
Thanks.